Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to an algebra tutorial video learning about factoring by grouping. In this video, we're going to transition and actually develop the method about why factoring by grouping works and kind of the step-by-step procedure. But if you just want some straight examples of seeing it, the next two videos are just going to be give a problem, factor it out using this method. Okay, so developing the method of factoring by grouping. We're going to start by looking at a multiplication problem here. So I've got 2x plus 3, it's binomial. I'm going to multiply it by x minus 5, another binomial. And let's talk about how to do that here. And we're going to break down this multiplication process. So we know using the distributive property, we start with the 2x, and it's going to multiply both of the terms in the other binomial. So I could rewrite it saying like this way. Okay, I'm going to take that 2x, and it's going to multiply the x minus 5. After that, then we take the 3 and it multiplies both terms. And so we get all four terms being multiplied. So I can think of then as, well, we've got the plus 3, and then that is multiplying x minus 5. And now let's do the distribution here. So the 2x, I'm going to multiply it into both terms here. And so we have 2x times the x minus, and then 2x times the 5. Now we have plus 3, so we distribute the 3 times x, and 3 times 5. What do I get there? We get plus 3 times x. Oops, switch colors there. Minus, and then the 3 times 5. Okay, so it's a little bit painstaking the way I wrote it out, but you kind of get the idea. We use the distributive property, we multiply everything out, and for a final result, we get 2x squared minus 10x plus 3x minus 15. All right, we're going to pause at this point because here's where I want to highlight. We're going to learn about factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is used when we have four terms. Used on polynomials with four terms. So at this point right here, you can see we've got 2x squared minus 10x plus 3x minus 15. That's a polynomial with four terms. And typically, we want you guys to recognize when you see four terms and you're asked to factor something, factoring by grouping is kind of the default that you should head towards to see if you can get it to factor out. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out is when you have four terms, you're probably going to use factoring by grouping. All right, now let's take a look at what we did here. So we have a polynomial with four terms. I can combine the middle terms, but I'm not just for the sake of this exercise. Factoring, I want to be able to take this four-term polynomial and be able to work backwards and factor it back into binomials. So we're going to kind of work out the steps here. Let's rewrite. I've got my four-term polynomial here. 2x squared minus 10x plus 3x minus 15. Let's work backwards through the steps here. Well, the first thing I want to do, and we call it factoring by grouping, is I want to group it into two groups. So I'm going to group it, the first two terms together, and with my plus sign, I want to leave it in the middle, and I'm going to group my second two terms. Be careful if you have a negative sign. We'll do an example of that later, but I want to make sure I'm not messing up any negative signs. So be careful if there's a negative sign and adding parentheses that you're not changing the actual polynomial. So there we go. We're grouping. That's step number one. I got to put my four-term polynomial into two groups of two. Now here's why we group things out. The second step is look for common factors. So let's step 2. I'm going to look in the 2x squared and the negative 10x. What are common factors? I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. They both have a factor of 2 in common, and they both have a factor of x. So I can factor out the greatest common factor and rewrite that as this becomes x. 2x squared divided by 2x leaves just an x. And the 10 divided by 2 is 5. X divided by x is just 1. So we end up with 2x multiplied by x minus 5 once I factor out the 2x. Notice right here, we found the 2x in common, and before we took the 2x and distributed it in to get it out to our polynomial at the end. So if we're going in reverse, I need to be able to factor out the 2x. It's starting to look familiar here, right? Now let's take a look at this one over here. So we've got 3x and 15. What is the greatest common factor here? Well, I can factor out a 3 from both of those. There's no variables in common, but let's pull out my 3. So I still got plus. I'm factoring out a 3, and what do I have left? Well, we've got 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I'm left with 1x. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and it's still being subtracted. So we're now matching, number 2, we're matching what we had right here. 2x distributed by the x minus 5 plus 3 times x minus 5. We worked our way backwards by grouping, and then for each group, pulling out the greatest common factor. Okay, now we're going to go one step more and recognize we have some other factors. This x minus 5 and this x minus 5 are common binomial factors. They're both, I can factor them out and recognize, oh, they both have an x minus 5 in common. So let's factor that out. And what do I have left? I have the 2x right here. I factored out the x minus 5, so that's no longer there. But I still have the plus 3 right here. So we got 2x plus 3. And I could get back to it by taking this x minus 5 and distributing the whole thing back in and getting right back to this step. X minus 5 times 2x and the x minus 5 times the 3. But there we go. That is factoring by grouping. And we ended up with our final result. There's 2 binomial factors as opposed to the 4-term polynomial that we started with. So just reviewing the steps. If you have a polynomial with 4 terms, you're probably going to use factoring by grouping. Our first step is to get 2 groups. So we add in the parentheses to get 2 groups. The second step is find the greatest common factor from each group. And so we pulled out the 2x, we pulled out the 3, and wrote what was left inside the parentheses. If we have matching binomials, so we had x minus 5 for both terms, they're common binomials, and we can factor those out. And so we put x minus 5 in common in the front, and we were left with the 2x plus 3, and there's our factored polynomial. All right, so we'll do a couple more examples of factoring by grouping, but that's how we came up with this method, is we looked carefully at how we multiplied and realized we could just factor and do that problem in reverse and call it factoring by grouping.